Hi, I'm Andrew Fisher. Welcome to the Incredible Confidence Podcast, where you can learn valuable life skills like how to find the courage to explore your individual identity in a complex social world, how to be a more confident person, and how to gain the clarity it takes to focus on your goals and start getting what you want out of life. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. In this episode, I want to talk about desire. Like I said in the last episode, I kind of grew up in my own little world. I didn't have any friends when I was really young, and I was homeschooled. We lived out in the country, so I spent a lot of time out by myself. When I was pretty young, but a little bit too old for this, I used to wet the bed. And I remember this being kind of an issue. My mom kept trying to figure out what it was and how to get me to stop, and ended up taking me in to see a doctor. And I must have been about 6 or 7 by the time it finally stopped happening. But I remember what it was that finally made it stop happening. My mom rented this book from the library, and it was about bedwetting, and it was a kid's book, but she read it to me, and that night, I didn't wet the bed. And the next morning, I woke up, and the bed was dry, and I was like, wow, something changed. And I think at that moment, at least this is the first time that I remember this happening. But at that moment, I realized that something in my brain had changed when my mom read that book to me. And I asked her to read it to me again the next night. And she said, no, read it yourself. You're old enough. And I didn't want to. I don't know why, but I wanted her to read it to me. So I didn't read it, and I wet the bed that night. Next morning, I woke up, and I realized, yes, it's got to be something in my brain. Something in my brain changes when I read the book. And I think I could have gone 2 directions with this. I could have thought that, all right, well, I've got to read the book from now on every night, or I'll wet the bed. But instead of that, what I actually ended up realizing was that whatever it is that changed in my brain when I read that book, I need to figure out how to make that happen without the book. I think probably that realization came about because I was kind of stubborn and I didn't want to read the book myself. I think if I hadn't have been so stubborn, I would have just thought, okay, I need to read the book every night. But I was too stubborn for that. So I tried to figure out a way around reading the book every night that would still get me the same result. So a little bit of laziness, a little bit of being stubborn, and a lot of genius for a 6-year-old kid, or however old I was. I don't know how it was that I had that realization. It seems like it was kind of a stroke of luck. The next thing that I remember happening that kind of contributes to this story is later on, when I was probably about 10 years old. I remember I was walking out in the field behind our house, and it was on our property, but it was adjacent to the neighbor's property, obviously. And the neighbors that lived back there happened to be drug dealers. And this, actually, I found this out later, that it was true that they were drug dealers, but I believed they were drug dealers even when I was a kid. I don't know if somebody said something or if that's just what I assumed, but they had Rottweilers that they had trained to guard their property so that nobody would come onto their property and in case they had a deal going on or something, I guess. I don't know. But while I was walking through our field, I looked up, and one of the Rottweilers was right there, like probably about 15 feet away from me. And I just stopped. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm this tiny little kid. I was small for my age, and this giant Rottweiler, probably bigger than I was at the time, and it's just staring at me 15 feet away. We're both facing each other, and I remember, I mean, just these thoughts are racing through my head, and I remember hearing somewhere that dogs can smell fear. And the advice that was given when I heard that was, you got to try to act like you're not afraid. Just push the fear out of your mind and try to just stand up to them and let them know that you're boss. And I'm just this little kid, but I didn't have any options. I mean, if I run, I know the dog's going to chase me, or at least that's what I think. And I'm standing there not knowing what to do. So I decided, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand up as tall as I can, and I'm going to tell that dog to go away. So I pointed back towards his house, and I said, "Go home." And the dog didn't do anything. So I do it again. I pointed the dog's house, and I said, "Go home." And I just stare. And sure enough, the dog turns around and starts walking back towards his house. And then he kind of pauses and looks back at me, and I'm still glaring, pointing. And so he just continues on and walked back to his house. And I mean, any other thing could have happened. In fact, this could have been a complete fluke. Maybe the dog just was minding his own business and didn't really care about this stupid little 10-year-old kid. But for me, the way it happened kind of solidified what I'd already learned about bedwetting. This concept that your mind can change reality. So here I was, this 10-year-old kid, and I had this kind of running through my head the rest of my upbringing, that your mind can change your reality. And I grew up in a Pentecostal family. We didn't really talk about that kind of stuff. We would talk about prayer and how you can pray to God, and He might, change your reality, I guess. He might grant you your prayer, whatever you're requesting. But the control was never within yourself, except to the extent that you could stop yourself from, sinning or whatever. You could make choices about what you did, but you couldn't affect reality. You couldn't affect the things that happened to you. Miracles might happen, but that was God, not yourself. And so I think I was kind of unique in my perspective within that social group, because I was probably the only one that was thinking those kinds of thoughts. All of my other, I mean, when I got a little older, I kind of made friends with the rest of the kids that were going to that church that we went to, and all of them kind of seemed to buy into what was taught there at that church, which was, you gotta pray and seek God and try to make good choices, and hopefully God will, see you favorably and grant you miracles or whatever. But it was always kind of this attitude of, I don't have control, that God controls everything. And my worldview, at least in that little group of people, was kind of the opposite. I mean, from that point that I remember of learning that I could stop myself from wetting the bed, and that moment of realizing that I could make without really communicating it well. I mean, because you can't communicate to a dog through your words that you're more powerful. I mean, in fact, I wasn't more powerful. If the dog had wanted to, it totally could have killed me. I mean, I was a small kid and big dog, and Rottweilers are pretty tough, and if it had wanted to, it could have killed me, but it didn't. I had somehow, at least in my mind, I had caused reality to be such that this dog followed my command. I felt like I was in control. And so all through my upbringing, I remember kind of feeling this way. I remember, when I was 14, I started going to the church school. It was a school that was run by the church. It was a little private school. I remember there were all these rules in the school. There was this uniform that you were supposed to wear, and all these things that you're supposed to do. Like before lunch every day, we would walk around the school like 4 times or something, and you had to follow all the rules and do everything right, and all the other kids did, but I didn't. I didn't want to wear my uniform, so I just didn't. And whenever somebody would confront me about it, I would say, okay, yeah, I'll wear it. I'll bring it next time. And then I just didn't. And that was not the way that people behaved in that environment. And I continued this, as I got older. And it sounds like this is a good thing, but it wasn't always. Because it actually ended up controlling the way that I thought about myself in a social group. I started to see how easy it is to manipulate the way other people think of you by thinking differently, and by talking differently, and by acting differently. And I started to put into practice. I mean, it started gradually. I didn't really realize it was happening, but because I grew up in that environment full of people who all kind of followed the rules, and I was kind of a kid that didn't really want to follow the rules, but at the same time, I liked kind of making everybody happy. I liked that I sort of felt this like power to make people happy by saying things a certain way, or by acting a certain way when people were around. But in my mind, I was just being manipulative. I mean, to them, I was following the rules, or at least I was breaking the rules in such a way that wasn't offensive, But in my mind, I was controlling these people because I was making them think about me differently than how I really was. I was behaving outwardly as if I was, this good kid that was following all the rules, kind of, or following some of the rules. And when I would break them, I would kind of come up with these excuses or make it seem like, okay, yeah, next time I won't do it or whatever. But I knew what was happening all along. I knew what my plan was. My plan was to break as many rules as possible and just carry on without getting in trouble for it. And so the way that affected me as I got older was I started to move this philosophy into more of my professional and social worlds. So as I went out to get a job, I always felt like I was in control of every situation, which is good and bad. It's good because, if I ever felt like I needed to get a job or whatever, I always felt like it would be possible. All I need to do, I would think, is I need to figure out what that position, that job, what they want, and I need to communicate effectively with the managers or boss or whoever would be hiring, and it kind of, in my mind, I was thinking like manipulate them into giving me a job. And the reason that that's problematic is because it started making me feel like I wasn't being true to who I was. I had this great skill of kind of being a chameleon and morphing myself into what it was that somebody else wanted. I did that in my relationships too. As I got older and I started dating, which I talked a little bit about in the last episode, eventually when I started dating, I was following all this material that I was reading about pickup artists, and I took the things that I was learning and I molded myself into this person that was kind of dateable. But it made me feel like fake. It made me feel like nothing that, like, the entire reality that I was constructing wasn't real. I would get these girls to date me, and I would keep them dating me by pretending to be different than I was. I would get really good at making a girl feel like I was a nice guy, and which I was a nice guy, but I would do it in such a way that wasn't authentic, where I would make a girl think that I was interesting, and but it was all planned out, and it felt like I was trapped in this fake reality that I was constructing. Like I was living kind of a movie or something. And I remember one of the relationships that I ended up having, the girl was in love with me, and I didn't even really like her that much. I mean, I did, but not as much as she liked me. And this went on for years. And that wasn't the only relationship like that. That there were several like that. And it was always this imbalance. And if it wasn't a girl that liked me more than I liked her, then it was the opposite, because since I was so good at changing myself into being somebody for a girl, then if I finally ran into a girl that didn't like me, I would be putting all this effort into trying to be a certain person so that girl would like me. And then it was like the opposite. Like, here this girl doesn't care about me, and I'm going crazy over her because all I can think about is, why won't she like me? So, as I started growing in my confidence and kind of letting this stuff go, letting go of the idea of what a girl thought of me, and it kind of solidified over the last year. But really the last 5 years I've been thinking about this kind of stuff. I want to take, and I have been taking this idea of being able to control your world and kind of turn it on its head.